Hello. Mic check, mic check. How's everyone doing today? It is cold. Cold outside. So as always, if you would like to see the slides, go ahead and just put in the slides command. Yeah, the cold weather kind of came out of nowhere. Definitely wasn't expecting it here in New York. All right. Oops, I forgot to update the feedback form, but that's okay. I don't think a lot of people have been filling it out, which is no worries. We'll just move feedback to like the Discord channel. There's one less thing to do. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my slides, or share my screen first before I forget again. All right, so this session is going to be pretty similar to last session in that, it's going to be less slides and more like kind of interactive demo on CodePen. So yeah, you don't need to kind of have any work saved from last time. We might do a quick refresher, but just in the interest of time, we might want to just start getting the ball rolling because there's a lot of JavaScript to cover. All right, let's go ahead and we could maybe give it like 1 to 2 more minutes before we kick it off. I need to go back to hosting more live polls. I realize I haven't done that since like the first 2 sessions. So I'll probably have some more next time. But just a quick update. If you weren't around for the last session, we do have our holiday schedule now. I actually should post that in Discord or Notion, somewhere more visible than just the recording. But essentially, we're going to take next Thursday off. So there'll still be a lesson on next Tuesday. But Thursdays, we're going to be off. And then the Thursday after that, we're going to be off. So 2 Thursdays in a row, we're going to take a quick break. But besides that, it's business as usual. Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and get it started, just because the stuff in the beginning is pretty standard, just recap stuff. And yeah, we can go ahead and just dive into it. We have a lot of JavaScript to go through, and hopefully I time it well today. Hey. All right, let's go ahead and get it started. So the YouTube channel has finally been updated. We now have all 8, I think, recordings up on YouTube. Where's the 7? 7 or 8. We all have them uploaded in YouTube. They're all organized in the Web Dev Bootcamp playlist. So just in case you ever miss a class, you feel free to just look at YouTube, since Twitch still deletes my videos. Just it takes longer for them to delete now, which is nice. We have a new logo and branding. So shout out to our brand designer, Jess, for helping us with that. As you can see, as you might have noticed, the Discord logo has been updated, and yeah, we have our nice little word mark here. So yeah, it's still a work in progress, but really happy to see kind of the branding come together a little bit more. All right, so just a really quick recap. Last time we learned about the very basic building blocks of JavaScript. We kind of got into like what JavaScript does, what it is. What are like variables, functions, ES6, comments. We actually talked about quite a lot. Once again, just want to stress that this is not, there's no way we could learn all of JavaScript in just 3 sessions. But more like what this is supposed to do is just give us kind of a good foundation and just let us recognize a lot of the key parts of JavaScript, so that we can, when we go start building more apps, a lot of this will be continuously revisited. So don't worry if you feel like you're not quite sure how this all works together. It's going to make a lot more sense once it's applied. At least that's how it was for me when I was starting out. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. I'll tell Jess that she did an awesome job. I really Really like how it looks. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. And once again, just as last time, this agenda will largely be walked through in the interactive demo. We're not going to have like slides for each of these, just because I just feel like that's a little bit more fun. So today we're going to be talking about conditionals. We're going to talk about if-else statements. We're going to talk about arrays and some array methods. Talk about objects and object methods. And then we're going to round it out with some loops, some for loops. And hopefully that should be good for today. I considered adding more, but then I realized, a lot of this stuff is pretty key. Don't want to rush through it too much. It's more important that we focus on these parts and get a solid foundation before we move on. And then we'll, as always, we'll go over the homework and the Q&A. All right, so I'm going to just dive right into it. If you want to follow along in CodePen again, feel free to. You can go to this URL right here. Let me go ahead and copy it, or I'm going to paste it in the chat. So this is CodePen. CodePen is just a nice little mini coding environment for us to practice, HTML, CSS, JavaScript in. So let's go ahead and open that up. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull this open. All right. Cool. So it should start you off with a blank slate like this. Let me see. How's my? Yeah. Hopefully, if it's hard to read, just let me know. I can make the font size bigger. Same as last time. We're gonna basically hide the CSS and HTML tabs so we can focus on the JavaScript tab. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on this drop down here. Click Maximize JavaScript Editor. That should go ahead and just squish the rest of them for us. And then we're going to go ahead and open the console as well. So the console can be found at this, for me at least, this bottom left corner. Depending on your screen size, it might be in a different location. But where my mouse is kind of circling over is where you can find that console button. How do I get rid of this ad? There might not be a way to get rid of it. That's okay. Oh wait, this is X. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and make this console bigger and cover up our browser preview since we're not going to be working in the browser yet. On next Tuesday, we're going to basically put everything back together with what we learned in the first couple of units. And we're going to actually have JavaScript interact with HTML. And I think that's when a lot of these pieces are going to start to come together a little better. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and before I begin, I'm going to go ahead and just write comments for the outline of our agenda today. So I'm going to start with conditionals. Actually, it might be easier just for me to do it as we go, but I'm going to use these comments to kind of separate each block. Cool. So just to recap really briefly, we talked about comments, we talked about console logs, we talked about variables, talked about functions, right? There's a lot going on. One thing I want us to recall really quick are this word I introduced called booleans. So if we create a variable, like, a boolean is basically like a variable or if some kind of variable that is supposed to represent like an on and off switch, right? If we think about like a light switch, it's either on or it's either off, right? Booleans can be thought of as a similar way. Booleans can either be true or Booleans can be false, right? So we say like, if I console.log 7 greater than 6, right? It's going to run true, right? As you can see, what happens is that 7 greater than 6 gets interpreted as a logical condition. In this case, 7 is greater than 6, so that's why we get true, right? So this is like true is a Boolean, right? In JavaScript, we only have two. We have true and false. And as you can see, like different logical statements, like for example, 7 is greater than 6, will give us different Booleans. I'm going to also go ahead and change my settings. Someone recommended this last time. It was super helpful, which was disabling the auto updating preview. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle that off, but I think it'll still work if you leave it on. It's just a little easier for my demo here. Okay, cool. So as you can see, like 7 greater than 6 is one example of how we can get like a logical statement of true or false. So I want us to kind of zone in on these couple. So there's greater than, there's less than, there's greater than equal than, there's less than equal than, right? And hopefully I'm not going to go over each of these in depth. Hopefully they should be somewhat like familiar, but if not, feel free to play around with them until they're more comfortable, because these definitely are pretty core to logical booleans or logical operators. The one I want us to really hone in on a little bit more is equality. So if we say like 6 is equal to 7, and we run this, it takes a second, I think. It says false, which makes sense, right? Because 6 is not equal to 7. And what I want us to focus on is that I use 3 equal signs here, right? So when we're talking about equality in JS, we use 3 equal signs like this. Now, sometimes in older JavaScript code, you might see something like this, 2 equal signs. And I'm going to go ahead and say that you should almost never use 2 equal signs. I can't think of a single time where that is useful. They do similar things, but to be more specific, the triple equals is a deep equality. Like it actually checks if things are the same. Two equal signs is shallow equality. And it's not really that useful because, let me demonstrate right here. I don't know if this, I haven't tried this in a long time, but to show you what shallow equality is, I'm going to do 6, the number. Let's see if it's equal to 6, the letter, like 6 as a string, right? These are technically different things, right? They should be different things. But look at what we get. We get true. So, like that's not really that helpful if we think about it, right? Like we don't want this to be equals to each other, but yet JavaScript has decided that, with 2 equal signs, the number 6 is kind of equal to the letters or the string 6. Someone asked, are you a bootcamp student or do you run the bootcamp? I run the bootcamp, but I used to be a bootcamp student and I used to teach at bootcamps like several years ago. So I was a bootcamp student at one point, but this bootcamp I'm running right now. So yeah, so that's a little story of equality in JavaScript, right? So don't use this. Don't use double equals. Use triple equals. If you can think of a situation like where it is valuable to use a double equals over triple equals, please let me know, because I've been searching for a long time and I cannot find anything. But essentially with these 6, well, I guess these 5, right? Greater than, less than, greater than, less than, equal to, equals, we get a lot of these logical operators, right? Which would be used for conditionals. Now, this will lead us to how we actually use them in code. And this leads us to our next section, which is if else. And once again, if you're from Python, if you're from like a different programming language, this should be fairly familiar. If not, no worries. So if else are a common way to handle control flow in code. And basically what this means is we use if else statements. We use logic to help control the path that a code takes. So let me give an example here. So let's say we have my age again. So I'm going to say const age. And remember, const is just another way to declare a variable. It's just immutable. I can't actually update the age here. And I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to go ahead and write a bit of code that basically it logs, like let's say our code checks to see if my age is over 20, right? So what we can do is use an if else statement. So if age, right, because I have the age variable, is greater than equal to 20, so if the age is 20 or above, basically. So if, and then we put parentheses, and then inside the parentheses, we put the condition, like what do we actually want to be true. And then we're going to put brackets. And then inside here is what we want to happen if our condition is true, right? So if the variable age is in fact greater or equal than 20, then we want something to happen here. I'm just going to have a log statement that says you are over 20. Haha. And then basically, and to catch everything else, right? So else being that everything that every value of age where this is actually false, we can put in the else. And we define an else by writing just else after the last curly brace of the if, and then another curly brace, and then we can, put another log statement here. And else's are optional, just by the way. If we have an if statement, we can just have the if statement by itself, but we put an else if we want something to explicitly happen if the stuff in the if doesn't run. You are younger than 20. So let's go ahead and just run this code. And, since I manually defined age here, this code should never really run, right? It should always give us this console log, but let me just go ahead and run it to demonstrate. Hey, Smoke HKA. So you asked, how can I usefully include very long text in a web page? So usually how we do, just for the purpose of this bootcamp, I usually kind of batch a lot of the questions at the end. We'll do like a general Q&A. That's if any questions kind of separate from the lesson. But I think I might need a little bit more clarification here. Like, is there are you trying to include like a book or? I guess there's my challenge is like there's many different ways to kind of include such a long text on a web page, and maybe if you give me a little bit more details, I can be more specific there. But cool. All right, so back to the logic flow. Yeah, we can see that my age is over 20, so it console logs you are over 20, right? So this if else statement is what we used in coding to control the flow of a file, right, or some script. So let's make this a little bit more useful. Like this example isn't great, right? Because obviously I hard coded the age as 26, right? But what if we made this a function? Let's say we wanted to find a function and to check if something is even or not. So to check if a number is even or not, we need another operator, which I will introduce, called modulo. I don't want to get into modulo too much because honestly, it's not used that much. But modulo is basically like it's kind of like dividing. Or maybe I'll just demonstrate it. So here's my if else example. I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. So let's say we want to create a function called isEven, right? In this function, we'll take in a number, and it will say true or false depending on if the number is even, right? So also what this exercise right here is like a super simple version of like a LeetCode code or a coding interview problem, right? A lot of coding interview problems are going to be like define this function that does this, and that's kind of what we're doing here, just with a very simple one. So isEven, like we're going to define our isEven function. So remember that there are many different ways to define functions, but this is one of my preferred ways, called a function declaration. So I'm just going to write the void function. I'm going to write the name of our function, so isEven. And then in the parentheses, I want to put the argument. So in this case, I'm just taking in a number, so I can just call it num for short. But remember that it doesn't matter what it's called, right? I can call it like gibberish if I want, but num is just easy for me to understand that it's a number. So now we're going to put our curly braces. And then we need to actually, we need to return something, right? So we don't actually want to log something in this case. We want to return true or false if the number is even. Right, so a very, there's many different ways to solve coding problems. One very not efficient solution, but I mean it could be considered a solution if you do this long enough, is to basically just keep adding if statements. So you can say if num equals 1, return false. And then if we want multiple conditions, right? We talked about if and else here. If we want multiple different conditions, we could do else if. So we could do like else if num equals 2, return true. And you can kind of see where this is getting at, right? I can just keep adding else ifs and hard code, as we call it, the answers. But as you can see, this is very inefficient. And this is not a quote unquote programmatic way to do things, right? The whole point of programmers is that most of us are pretty lazy, and a lot of times, well, just humanity picked up programming and computing so that we wouldn't have to do a lot of repetitive things like this. So, as you can see, I have this isEven function, And it really only works if I give it a number in between 1 and 4, right? If I give it like a 5 because I haven't written enough conditions, it's not going to work. But here you can kind of see an example of that if-else statement being used in practice. So, this is not really ideal. What we actually want is to basically divide num by 2 and see if there's a remainder, right? So the modulo operator is the easiest way to do that. So, we don't have to memorize the modulo operator, but I'm just showing you this is like a really shorthand way to do that. Like if we want to know if you divide num by 2 and you want to know if there's a remainder of 0, you could do something like this. So if num modulo 2 equals 0. So this is basically the same thing as saying, hey, if you divide num by 2 and the remainder is 0, then do this, right? Do whatever's in here. So in this case, we want to return true because, if you take a number like 4 divided by 2, which is 2, and there's no remainder left, then it is even, right? So we want to return true, else return false. And now let's test our function, right? So we call is even, let's say we put 3, right? I'm going to console log the result of is even on 3. And let's go ahead and run it. You get false, right? Cool. So let's test it again on a really big number. So like 1,000, like I'm just going to do like a really big number. I'm not even, it's like 12 million. Yeah, 12 million something. But it ends in 2, right? So this should be true. So let's go ahead and clear and check it. True. Okay, cool. So as you can see, our is even function works pretty well. And as you can see, it's not limited to the same issues we've had with our hard-coded is even function, right? It works for even really big numbers. So someone asked, what happens if num modulo 2 gives you a weird result like negative infinity? I think, well, at least for modulo 2, that shouldn't happen, right? Because I think for modulo 2, the only results we should get for modulo 2 are 1 and 0. Because every number is either even or odd, I think. But we would try with like 0 or infinity, we might get a weird result. But in this case, I think it's like I think it's a mathematical truth that if you modulo a number by 2 and the remainder is 0, or yeah, if you divide a number by 2 and the remainder is 0, then it must be even. So I think this logic still holds up in that case. Yeah, my cat is I don't know if you can hear the purring, but she's enjoying this right now. Okay, so this code is like, it works pretty well. So we've solved the function, but let's take it one step further, and we can actually write this, we can actually compress this into one line, right? So if we just remember that, like, this itself, right, this statement of num modulo 2 equals 0 gives us true. Or if the number is true, right? If it's false, it gives us false. So what if we just return this, right? What if we just return that? And no matter what it is, it should work. So this is what I mean. I basically just compressed our lines of code. Sorry, the purring is pretty loud. I just compressed our lines of code into just one line. And as you can see, if we try it out, let's try a different number. Oops. So this one's odd, right? So if we try it out and we run it, false. So it works, right? It works even with those less of lines of code. So this is just a more efficient way to write code. But once again, I want us to know that neither of those solutions, they're both right? They both work fine. It's just that this would probably be considered a little cleaner, because it's just a more compressed version. That's not to say that compressed code is always better, right? We always want something that's more understandable, but for most programmers, this should be fairly understandable. So if that makes sense. You can hear all the purring. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay. Cool. All right. Oh yeah. Sorry. Someone mentioned integer. Yes, that's true. Only for integers. Not true for floats. So that's a really good point. If we put in a float in here, and just by the way, integers are just like whole numbers, right? Numbers with, without any decimals. And a float is a number with a decimal. I'm curious. I don't think we would get. I think we would get odd, right, if we put in a float with decimals. So that's a good point. That this function is kind of only valid for integers. But let's just pass in this float right here, right? Where we put in a number and then put, some decimals, and let's just see what happens. Actually, I'm gonna make the number. I'm gonna have it at even base, but then add decimals, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so it gives us false, right? Because with a decimal, there's going to be a remainder. So I guess our code doesn't hold up for floats as well. But I mean, yeah, I guess that's still fair, right? You can use modulus to do interesting procedural algorithms. Yeah, definitely. Modulus is very powerful, especially if you get deeper into LeetCode world. There's going to be a lot of problems that will require it. But for now, I think this is. I think this is good for now, just for a basic understanding of control flows. But yeah, definitely, it's good to get used to modulos. It's good to get used to kind of all these like equality operators and these comparisons, because you will be using them a lot as you go forward. Okay, cool. So hopefully we're all feeling decent about if-else statements. Of course, there's a lot more to say about if-else statements. I guess maybe one thing I'll leave us with is, I'm deciding whether or not to introduce ternary operators, but in the interest of time, I think I want to actually move on. Just, I guess, a really quick spiel on ternary operators. So there's actually an even shorter way to write this, but it's basically something that looks like this. So I'm going to say ternary. I think ternaries were introduced in ES6. Can someone correct me if that's right or wrong? I don't actually know if that's true or not, but I think they became more popular around when ES6 came out. So basically, a ternary is like a one-liner way to write an if-else statement. So it looks something like this. So if you were to write a ternary version of is-even, it'd be like this. Well, I guess it's kind of something like this. So you basically put the condition in front, and then you put a question mark, and then you put what you want to be returned if the condition is true. So in this case, it's just true. And then you put a colon, and then this is what you put if the condition is false. So this is like a compressed version of if statement, right? It's like this is the if conditional, and this is what happens in the if block, and this one happens in the else blocks. So if you ever see something weird that looks like this, just know that it's a ternary. We're not going to go super in depth in them right now, but just wanted to highlight that this is yet another version of doing if-else statements. Okay, I'm going to hide this for now. All right, let's move on to arrays. So let's see, I'm going to get rid of these console logs for now. Arrays. I'm actually going to block off sections with these multi-line comments. Okay, so arrays are lists, right? If you're familiar with programming, or if you've done other programming languages before, then this should also be fairly familiar. If you come from Python, arrays are also called lists. So they're basically they're not exactly the same, but they're very similar. So arrays are how we store lists of things in JavaScript, right? So you can have a list of, you could have a list of numbers, you could have a list of strings, you could have a list of other lists, and yeah, you could have a list of basically any other data type. So if we have an example of, let's go ahead and create an array for the Beatles. I actually don't remember all the, I think I remember some of the members. So it's like Ringo, I think, John. I should really know this. I forgot who are the other members of the Beatles, but for now, we'll just pretend that the Beatles have 2 members, and we'll add the rest later. Oh, that's good to know. I didn't know the ternary operator existed all the way back in ES1. I guess I only noticed that they started becoming popular around like 2015-ish, but that's interesting to know that it's actually been around longer. Okay, there we go. John, Paul, George, Ringo. Thank you. I should. I don't know. I forgot. John, Paul, George, Ringo. Okay, so we actually have our 4 Beatles here. So this is how we define an array, right? As you can see, we define it as a variable called Beatles, and Beatles is an array of strings, right? If we say like, I don't know, if we want to create an array of numbers, we could say like, I don't know, maybe Fibonacci numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, so forth, so forth. So as you can see, yeah, we have an array of strings, we have an array of numbers. You can have an array of anything, right? You can mix and match too. Not really recommended and not that common, but you can have a list of like booleans, numbers, other lists. They can be anything, right? You can put anything in a list. So what we're going to talk about now is how to access different members of the list. So I'm going to get rid of this here. Could you have an array of JavaScripts? In what sense? Like an array of like functions, an array of like other scripts? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. But yeah, I mean you can, if there's a data type in JavaScript, you can have an array of it. That's as far as I know. Oh, how important are the spaces as you're writing code in JavaScript? Yeah, so spaces aren't important at all in JavaScript. You can theoretically write code with almost no spaces. Well, I shouldn't say they're not important at all. They're like mostly not important. They're important inside strings. But we don't have to put spaces. It's more of like a style thing. Generally, like just like when you're writing English or any other kind of written language like that, you have like proper spacing. And so we have the same kind of thing in JavaScript, even though it technically doesn't make a difference in the correctness of the code if I remove the spaces here or not. But yeah, it's just more of like a style thing. So someone asked, have you covered Tailwind and CSS stuff? Yeah, we covered a lot of CSS and Tailwind stuff like 2 weeks ago. We have the recordings on YouTube. Let me go ahead and share the YouTube link if you do want to catch up and check it out. But we didn't get too deep. We only went over the very basics of CSS and Tailwind. We're going to be revisiting that a lot as we build more projects. Okay, cool. So let's talk about indexing or basically grabbing items from an array. So if you wanted to basically console.log George, right? So George is the 3rd item in the list. And in programming, when we count from 0, which is really weird for non-programmers to wrap their head around, but it's something you're gonna have to get used to if you go down the programming route. So programmers always start from 0 when they're counting. So instead of saying 1, 2, 3, even though that's how we as humans read the list, the computer is actually technically gonna read this as 0. This is item 0. This is item 1, and this is item 2. So if we wanted to console.log the 3rd item in Beatles, so George, we would actually write this, console.log Beatles at 2. So generally the rule of thumb is like, if you want the 3rd item, you would put in square brackets the number you want as a human readable number minus 1, generally. So by accessing item number 2, let's go ahead and run our code and see what we get. We get George, right? So indexing is just when we grab the take the array we want, put square brackets, and then put 2, or whatever number we want. So Savoy says, wow. That's interesting. That's literally a array of JavaScript. I don't know. I'm kind of scared of running eval in here. I don't know what's going to happen, but I am curious to try that out. Maybe if I have some time later, I can run that. We can see what happens. But I've never tried. Okay, cool. So let's say now that we've seen how to access items for an array. Oh, it just returns 1. Interesting. Yeah, JavaScript can be a mystery sometimes, for sure. So now that we've seen how to access items in an array, let's talk about replacing them, right? Let's say, I don't know, let's say we have John Cook from BTS has decided to join the Beatles, and they're going to replace George. Sorry, George. So if we wanted to do that, we can say Beatles, and remember the position we want to replace is the second position. It's actually, I mean, it's the third item, but for code, it's the second index. So index 2 equals Jung Cook. I think that's how you spell it. Or John Cook. Okay, so now we just replaced George with John Cook. So now if we console.log Beatles, okay, as you can see, we get our array. Oh, I accidentally ran it twice. But as you can see, George has been removed and been replaced with John Cook. Cool. So pretty simple stuff, right? We're just showing how to get items from an array and replace items from an array. But let's talk about some array methods. So I'm going to open up a new section here called array methods. Array methods. Okay. So remember that methods are built-in functions on data types in JavaScript. Or there are methods that are built-in functions on data types in JavaScript, as a more correct statement. So let's say instead of just replacing certain items in the middle, what if we wanted to add something to the end, right? Like let's say Beatles is in a list of 50,000 things, and right, we don't want to manually count which item we want to replace like we did here. Let's say we just want to add something to the very end. So in this case, arrays have a built-in method called .push. So .push adds something to the end of an array. So let's do a little demo here. So if we take Beatles, and remember we now have the original Beatles cast because we commented out this line. But let's say we actually decided not to replace George, and we just decided to add John Cook as an additional member of the Beatles. So now there's 5 Beatles. So what we can do is take the Beatles .push John Cook. And then if we console.log Beatles, let's see what we get. Cool. So as you can see, we get an array of 5 items, and you can see that John Cook has been added to the end. Notice here that I didn't have to overwrite the Beatles variable, right? That's because the push method, it actually just overwrites, it updates the current variable. It doesn't actually like create a new one. So this doesn't actually give us, it doesn't return anything. It just modifies the existing array. So certain methods will modify the existing object or array. Other methods will return a new one. So let's say we want to remove the last item in the array, right? Let's say maybe the management company in charge of the Beatles decided that they made a mistake with 5 Beatles, and it's time to just bring them down to 4. So let's remove the last item from an array, and to do that we can use .pop. Removes the last item of an array. So to demonstrate, we can just run Beatles.pop with no arguments, right? Pop and then empty parentheses, and this will just remove the last element of the array. So we can console.log Beatles. Let me get rid of this one. And we should end up with our original Beatles array, right? Because we added John Cook here in this line, and then we removed him again. Cool, so we get our original array. So that's what .pop does. One thing to note is that if you do want to save what got removed as a variable, .pop actually does return the last item that it removed. So we can make a variable, let's just use let this time, called removed member. And if we const.log remove member, it will tell us which member got removed. So let's go ahead and refresh this. John Cook. Okay, so it says, so yeah, John Cook was the removed member. So that's why we get it logged here. All right, cool. So those are, there are other array methods like slice, join. There's so many. Maybe we'll do join. I guess we'll maybe just like do one more before we move on. There's many other array methods, and you will encounter them as you build more apps. But for now, these are some of the most basic ones. Let's also do .join, because that's an interesting one. So join basically takes a list and combines all the elements into one string, right? So let's say we had our list of Beatles, and we want to like write a sentence that says like, the Beatles includes, you know, George, Ringo, yada, 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 right? We want to actually write this as a string, because right now it's a list, but we want to like join them together as a string. We can use the join. So join combines the elements of an array into one string. So let's try this out. So maybe we have a variable that's like introduction statement equals Beatles dot join, and then inside join it takes one argument, or it might take more arguments, but it takes one primary argument that says when you join the items together, what do you want to separate them by? So let me demonstrate it. If I just put a blank string, so just like a string with nothing in it, let's see what we get with our introduction statement variable. So I'm going to console log it, I'm going to clear it, run it. Okay, so as you can see, it just says Ringo, John, George, Paul, right? All in one word, no spaces, which might be what you want sometimes, but you know, for us, that's not ideal, right? Maybe what we actually want is to separate them by a comma, right? Comma and a space. So we can maybe do some. Sorry, my cat just stepped on my keyboard. Maybe we could do something like this. So comma, space. And then let's also add something to the beginning of the sentence, right? Let's add introducing the Beatles. And then you're going to end this string. And one way to add strings together is you can also use plus, right? But in between strings, and this will combine the strings. This is not recommended though, but this is still something that's very common in JavaScript, if that makes sense. So I'll show you the good way to do this, but for now, this is like the old school way of adding strings together, just so everyone's clear. Okay, so we've added this text to our statement, and we've joined the Beatles together with a comma space, and let's see what we get now. So I'm gonna clear this, I'm gonna rerun it. Introducing the Beatles, Ringo, John, George, Paul. Okay, cool. So we basically transformed our array into a sentence, right? A sentence that's a little bit more readable. So, oh yeah, so I mentioned that this is like the not great way of doing the string adding. The better way of doing it is to use something called string formatting. So this is how you can, this is the good way of combining strings. And it basically looks like this. So to use variables in a string, right, which is what we're doing here. We're trying to use like the Beatles.join variable. Like we're trying to use JavaScript inside a string. And the easiest and cleanest way to do that is to use a template string. And a template string starts with a backtick like this. So I think it's called a backtick, right? So it's like, I think for most people, it should be the button next to your escape button or one button. I don't know. It's everyone's keyboard is different. Mine doesn't even show up on my keyboard, but basically have a backtick, which kind of looks like this. And in the backtick is treated as a string, but it allows you to use a $sign operator, which will let you add variables into it. So I'll show you what I mean. So if we basically want to do the exact same thing as we did on this line, the way we could do that is like this. Introducing the Beatles. And then instead of adding plus, right? Plus is like the quote unquote bad way, or it's not a bad way, but it's just like, it's kind of out of style. And template strings are a much safer way of doing it. So we could do something like this. $, curly braces, Beatles.join, And then inside the join, we have our comma space. So it looks fairly similar, right? But as you notice, we don't have a plus sign. We're not combining the strings. This is actually just one big string. This dollar curly braces syntax just basically transforms what's ever in between it into a string, or it just concatenates it to the string for us. So kind of weird, but this is like a slightly more modern way of doing this. String. I'm just going to call this a string template example, or template string. Sorry, not string template. So someone asked, I think you should add more tags like JavaScript or web development to the stream. Yes, that's a really good point. I definitely have not been using making good use of the tags on Twitch or YouTube. So that's a really good call out. I'm going to do that after. Thanks for the rec. Cool. All right. So hopefully we're decent with arrays. We're going to come back and be visiting arrays a lot. Arrays are probably one of the most common data types you'll use. But just for now, just to kind of move on to other things, let's go on to the next part, which is objects. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're doing decent on time. Objects. So objects and arrays are like the core way, or some of the core ways that people store data in JavaScript, right? In this example up here, we had the Beatles variable, the Beatles array to store a list of the Beatles. Objects are for storing everything else that's not a list. So as an example, let's say you're building a video game, right? And you want something to represent your character, or the character that the player has, right? And the character usually has many characteristics to them, right? Their name, their age, maybe like where they're from, maybe their special abilities, right? Depending on the game, there's countless properties that we could have here. So whenever you have something like that, where you have an entity that has like many different properties, an object is usually what you want to go for. So let's build an object that will kind of represent some of the things that we're saying in that example. So let's pretend we have a video game, and our video game has a character object. So I'm going to say var character equals. And so for arrays, it was with these square braces, right? For objects, we create them with these curly braces. And of course, you could put them on multiple lines or just one line. I'm going to put them on multiple lines for easier readability. And basically the core of the object is made up of key value pairs. And a key is like the name of the property, and the value is the value of the property itself. So in this example, our character has a name, right? So we give it a name property. In this case, I'm just going to name it after myself because why not? So named could be Zach. It could have an age property, which would look like age, 26, as a number, and so forth. And as you'll notice, the keys are always strings. Even though we didn't put strings around them, JavaScript basically interprets these as strings. And the values can be anything, right? The values could be arrays, it could be other objects, etc. So for example, to demonstrate like an object within an object, let's say I have, I don't know, like abilities. Let's say this is like a fantasy game I'm playing. So I can create a abilities property and make the value another object. Let's say, I don't know, what am I like? Good at skateboarding as a property. False. I don't skateboard much anymore. But as you can see, like, an object is basically just made of these key value pairs, and the values can be anything, but the keys are always strings. Okay, cool. So just like in our example with the Beatles, let's first talk about how to grab or access values from the object. So let's say we wanted to console log our character's age. So one way we could do this is by doing console.log character dot age. So this is called the dot property accessor, right? So it basically, JavaScript is going to read this. It's going to look for a property that we have in this object called age, and then it's going to retrieve the value. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. Let me hide this console log here. Okay, so 26, right? Okay, cool. So pretty straightforward, right? Basically, we just take the object, add a dot, and then we type in the name of the key we want to grab. Let's say we wanted to go one level deeper. Let's say we wanted to access this good at skateboarding property, right? We want to know if this character is good at skateboarding. So we could just use two levels of dot properties, right? First, we use dot abilities, right? Because this right here gives us this whole object, right? It gives us this value. And since this is an object, that means we can call the dot property on it again. So dot good at skateboarding. And if we run this, we should get false. Okay, cool. So this is one way to access properties, and this is called using dot properties. And the other way you can access properties is by using bracket. I don't know the exact name. It's like just called bracket selectors. I don't think that's the right name, but someone can correct me on that. But it's basically using brackets instead of dots. So let me show you what that looks like. So if we're to do the exact same thing, if we're supposed to console log the person's age first, or the character's age, we can type console.log, parentheses, character, but instead of a dot, we're going to type a square bracket. And then we have to put the string of the key that we want to access. So in this case, age. So we have to put, single quotes or double quotes, age, and let's see what this gives us. So we clear and rerun it. It should give us 26, right? Sorry, it's kind of a delay, but yeah, 26. So this is basically the exact same thing. And, once again, whenever I show examples of like, here are the same ways you can do something, usually have a suggestion on which one you should get used to using. In my opinion, both are totally fine. But there is one major advantage of using bracket selectors that I'm about to show you now. So let me go ahead and comment this one. Let's say that we don't actually have the exact name of the property we want to access. And let's say the property that we want to access is stored on a variable. So for some reason, let's say somewhere else in our code, we have a variable called property we want to select or something, property. Let's say in this case, the property is name. What if we wanted to use this variable to select the actual name value in our object, right? Let's see what happens if I use dot. Oh yeah, you can hear the ambulance. Sorry about that. Let's see what happens if we use the dot property to try to access this, right? Using this variable. We want to explicitly use the variable and not the word name itself. So let's see what happens. So I'm going to console.log character dot property. Let's see what happens. Let's clear it and rerun it. Undefined. Uh-oh. So what's going on here? Well, basically what JavaScript is reading this as is like JavaScript sees this, and since we're using the dot property, it just assumes that everything coming after the dot is everything that comes after the dot is a string. So it looks up explicitly for a property called literally property. It's looking in our object for a property called property, and it doesn't see it. So it says it's undefined. But that's not what we want, right? We actually wanted the name. We wanted to have it look up the variable and get the name value, right? So this is the main reason why I would say, dot properties are fine, but for this one example alone, it's why I prefer the bracket selectors. Because with bracket selectors, check this out. We can just replace this dot, put brackets around the variable, and notice I didn't put strings around it, right? Because basically JavaScript works top down and it works inside out. So JavaScript basically looks inside the brackets first. It sees that there's a variable called property that's equal to name. So it basically swaps this word out for name, the string. And then, because character has an explicit name property, then it gives us our value. So let's run this and see what we get. we get the name Zach. So yeah, once again, there are two valid ways to do it: dot properties or bracket selectors. But just keep in mind that if you ever want to grab properties that are defined by variables, dot properties are just not going to work. Like that's why you would mostly get used to using these brackets. Okay, cool. So what we didn't talk about yet are, let's see. So let's also talk about like replacing variables, right? Let's say maybe our character in the game gets a name change, right? They actually want to change their name. So we can update properties by going like this: character. You can use dot, but I think it's better to use brackets. So I'm gonna use brackets name equals. I'm gonna change my name to, I don't know, Bobby. So this will just update my name property and replace Zach with Bobby, right? So this is how we overwrite. Let's say we want to delete properties. Let's say we want to delete the age property. We can just type in delete character name. I forget if it's delete or del. My Python knowledge is like bleeding in now, but I forgot if it's del or delete. Let's look it up. I think it's delete. Yeah, okay, it is delete. So this is how you delete the name or name property from a character. I said age, so I'd actually change that to age. So if we console.log our character now, we should see that the name is Bobby and that the age is no longer there. So let's see what it looks like. Someone said that when videos are uploaded to YouTube, they're a bit blurry, like the intro to Tailwind. Yeah, really sorry about that. There were a couple of videos where we recorded them before we got like a higher level on Twitch, and a lot of the quality is not great. I'm working on re-recording them or just like improving the qualities of some of the older ones. But hopefully the new videos have a little bit better quality. But cool. So let's check out our character, and as you can see, the age property is gone because we deleted it on line 87 here. And our name is now Bobby because we've overwritten our old name. So this is how you delete. This is how you overwrite or update keys. Cool. So that's pretty good for objects. Let's see. Maybe one other thing to talk about that's a little bit of a bonus is a spread operator. And this is kind of something that applies to objects or arrays. Something that's kind of common, not now, but when you get into more like React stuff, is that you're going to be making copies of an object, right? Let's say we want to, like, I don't know, clone our character and create a second version of our character, or it's just add a second character. And let's say we don't want to go out and type all of these again, like all of the same properties. We can use something called a spread operator to basically update or just basically create a weak copy or shallow copy of our object. So let's say I create a copy of our character called copy, and then I just do equals. I want to put brackets. And I'm going to do the spread operator. And the spread operator looks something like this. I'm just going to put it in the notes here, but it basically looks like a dot, dot, dot. So we can do dot, dot, dot character. And let's see what our copy looks like now. I'm going to go ahead and console log our copy. But as you can see, basically I put the dot, dot, dot in front of the object that we're trying to copy. And it basically will take all the properties in character and add them as properties to our new object. So let's see what this looks like here. Cool. So this is our copy, right? So it's basically the same as what our character object has become. So really, really easy way to make a copy. What if we not only want to make a copy, like we want to grab the same properties, but we want to overwrite the name? Well, spread operators make that super easy because we can just do dot, dot, dot character, comma, and then overwrite the name, right? Because the name is going to come with this spread operator, but we can actually overwrite it just by putting a comma after the spread operator and saying name is equal to, I don't know, Tommy. That's another one of my cats. And if we console log the copy, let's see what we get. Cool. So as you can see, we've not only copied our object, we've also overwritten it, all in one swift motion. So that's what the spread operator does. And I mentioned that this works for objects and arrays. So you know how earlier we had our Beatles array? Let's do the exact same thing. Let's create a copy of our Beatles. Let's call it Beatles2, Beatles Reborn or something. And what we can do is, if we're lazy, we don't want to type out all the members of our Beatles list again. We can just create a new array, do ... Beatles, and if we want to add new members at the end, we can just put a comma here and put a new member, John Cook. Or if we want to add someone in the beginning, we can just put a comma before our ... Beatles, and say, I don't know, who's the new leader of the Beatles? I don't know, Boss Baby or something. Okay, cool. So here we basically made a copy of our Beatles array, and we added Boss Baby to the front and John Cook to the end. So oops, let's go ahead and console log our new Beatles and see what that looks like. So let's see. The big in says working on a cult sales web developer bootcamp. You're gonna have to change the first character only on a string to uppercase and the rest to lowercase. Oh yeah, that's honestly a really annoying problem. I'm not gonna lie. I think I know they're like on Stack Overflow. There's like a bunch of one-liners, but I think that's something that I've looked up like a lot, like how to just capitalize the first letter, and it's always like more complicated than I expected to be. Okay, cool. But as you can see, our Beatles2 is here, right? Here you can see all the original members we basically like made a copy of, and we've added 2 new members. So that's what the spread operator does. And one other note about the spread operator is that it's from ES6. So remember with ES6, we're talking about it's a new update to JavaScript, and generally it's good to get used to a lot of the ES6 features, because many of them, not most of them, are considered pretty good practice these days. So cool. All right. With that, of course, there's a lot more we can go to with objects and arrays, but I feel like this about covers like the main principles. I think when y'all do the homework, it'll be a lot more like you'll get a lot more coverage of arrays and objects. But I think for now, this should be a fairly good start. Okay. We have a little time left, and I want to get us to maybe one of the more complicated parts, just to introduce it, right? Well, like I don't know if we're going to be able to cover it all today, but I want us to at least talk a little bit about loops, especially while we're on the subject of like arrays and objects. So loops are how we loop through an array, an object, or any kind of iterator like that. So let's say we want to write a function that basically takes a list and prints them out all uppercase, right? So for example, if we give our function Beatles, we want it to spit out Ringo, John, George, Paul, all in uppercase, right? So how will we do that, right? Because think about it, if Beatles has like 100 members, it's going to be too much of a pain to manually go into each one and say to uppercase, right? So that's why loops are extremely useful. If you have an array of 100,000 items, using a loop, you can have the program run through every single item. So let's create our function here. Well, first, let me go ahead and kick off our section. Loops. So let's call this function, I don't know, yell all or something. Yell all. So it's going to take a list, and it's going to a list of strings, and it's going to yell all of them, basically. So function yell all. Just for fun, I'm going to define our function the ES6 way. So I'm just going to call it const yell all. Only reason why I'm changing up the definitions here, like I'm not consistent with my definitions, is just, to kind of exposure of how to define functions. There's many different ways. But here I'm using the ES6 arrow function combined with the ES6 const. But this is all the same thing, right? It's just a function. So our function yell all is going to take in a array of strings. So let's call this like, I don't know, ARR. ARR is a pretty common shorthand for arrays, but you can call this whatever you want. So it's taking takes R, which is an array of strings, and we're basically going to write something called a for loop. And this for loop is basically going to say, for each item in the array, do something, right? So let's break down how this works. So a for loop always starts with the word for, and then space, parentheses, and this is where it's going to get kind of weird. There's 3 parts in this parentheses. The starting point, so it looks something like this. The starting point starts by saying it defines the iterator variable we're going to be using to go through the array. And each part of this this for block in parentheses is separated by this semicolon. It's a really weird syntax, and honestly, this is one of the hardest things to memorize in the beginning, just because it's going to be very not, like, you're not going to be super used to writing it. But that's why we're introducing loops now, so we can get into the habit early. Because trust me, loops are definitely a lot more complex than a lot of this other stuff we covered. But hopefully with this example, it'll make a little bit more sense. So this first part of the loop just says where the loop starts. So in this case, we're starting from 0. Because remember, programmers, we don't count from 1, we count from 0, right? Because the computer starts counting from 0. So we're basically saying 0 being the first index of the array, right? Start at the beginning of the array. Okay, so the second part of the for loop is when it ends. So if we wanted to go through the entire array, we basically say, we add a condition of saying, hey, keep running the loop until I is no longer less than the length of the array. Kind of complex, but once again, this is more something that you get into muscle memory of writing rather than having to memorize every little bit of how it's being run. So if it looks weird, don't worry. It's going to come a lot more naturally with practice. Okay, so now we add the second semicolon to end the second part of our loop. And the final part of our loop is our step. Basically, it's saying how, like, each time you loop, how much bigger does I get? For example, if you want to go backwards, you could say like I minus minus, right? If you want to start, we'd have to change the other conditions, but I minus minus would let you start at the end and go backwards, right? If you want to skip every other item, you could do I plus equals 2, right? To skip every other item. But in this case, we just want I to go up by 1 every single time, right? We want I to start at 0, then we want to go to 1, then we want to go to 2, so forth. So the standard way of writing that is, you could just many different ways, but I plus plus is generally the most common way. And this is just basically saying each time the loop runs, add 1 to I. It's just a fancy way of writing that. Once again, a lot of weird things going on here, but trust me when I say it'll get a lot easier just from doing more practice. You don't have to worry about like getting the syntax exactly right the first day, because very few people do. It's kind of a lot to memorize. Okay, so kind of scary setup for the for loop, but after we have this part set up, it becomes a lot more smooth, because inside the curly braces of the for loop is basically, we have to write the code of what's going to happen on each loop, right? So in this case, our function is yell all. So if we create a variable that represents each item in the array, we can do something like this. So maybe var item equals r brackets I. And before we do the yell or anything, let's just console.log item to show what this is. So notice that I did not just make item I, right? Because I is a number. I is our representation of each index, and each index is basically like, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, like all the items in the array. We have to actually access the items by doing array brackets I, right? Because I is the index, which is like kind of what number, what order it is, but item is the actual string itself. So let's just leave this as is, and let's run our function on our Beatles array. So yell all Beatles. So I'm just gonna clear my console. I'm gonna go ahead and run the code. Okay. I guess I have a console log left over from here. Sorry about that. So ignore this first console log. But as you can see, it's basically it's console log Ringo, it's console log John, George, Paul, right? It's basically spit them out on different strings or different lines, because this loop has run 4 times. It starts at 0, it runs this code, and then I becomes 1, it runs this code, I becomes 2, runs this code, I becomes 3, runs this code, and then it sees that, oh, at I equals 4, it's no longer less than the length, so it ends. That's basically what's going on here. And once again, the syntax is scary for loops, but it will come a lot more naturally with practice. Okay, so we're almost done with our function here. So now that we've actually grabbed each item of the list, we need to actually make it loud, or you need to yell it. And just a reminder that for strings, we have a built-in method called toUpperCase that we can use to make it easier for ourselves. So on the item, I can just use .toUpperCase. And remember, I don't have to put this in here in the console log. I could also put this on my variable definition. It doesn't really matter, right? Because both of these are strings. So either works. But as you can see, I put toUpperCase, console log, and let's see what we get. So I'm going to clear my console, rerun the code, and it yells all the members of the Beatles. So very, very simple demo of loops. But as you can see, loops and arrays are very commonly used together for this purpose. You can also loop through objects. We don't have enough time to get into that today, but maybe in the homework, you guys can challenge yourselves by trying to loop through an object and just seeing how that's different, because it is a little different. And yeah, that's, I think that's all I want to say for loops for now. Also, one thing to mention is that there's actually two ways to loop. There's a for loop and there's a while loop. And as you can see here, we've only talked about for loops. And this is because it's important to know while loops, but to be honest, I can't think of any, it's one of those style things. It's most good code, at least that I can think of. I mean, I'm sure there are situations where you can use a while loop, but while loops are generally a lot less safe than for loops. And yeah, it's just when you're going to write a loop, 99.999% of the time, it's going to be a for loop. And that's why I didn't really cover while loops today. I would say if you come across while loops, I encourage you to dive into them a little bit more. But for now, just for loops, I would say it's best use of your time to focus on for loops. Some people might disagree with me on this, but for JavaScript, I'm just saying that very few situations you'll need to use a while loop, and you almost need to use for loops every day. Okay, cool. Hopefully that wasn't too bad. Yeah, I know that was a lot. We went through a lot more code today, but we're almost with objects, arrays, loops. We're almost there at the kind of advanced, intermediate advanced JavaScript stuff. So we're definitely moving really fast, and that's why the homework is going to be really helpful to kind of deepen understanding, right? Because once again, there's no way you can learn JavaScript in just 3 sessions. I know it took me a really long time before I could even say I was comfortable with JavaScript, years even. So, it's a journey that's going to take a long time, but I just want us to make sure we have the basics down pretty well. And once we go into applications and once we start doing leak code problems, you're going to get a lot of opportunities to kind of deepen your knowledge there. Cool. All right, so we're pretty good on time. I'm going to end with the homework. So for this time's homework, I do my best to try to find free homework. So this time I found that Code Academy's JavaScript course is the best free resource for covering the more, conditionals, arrays, loops, and iterators and stuff. So I would go through Code Academy's JavaScript course. It's actually quite good. I haven't done it in many years, but I remember it being pretty nice. And I want you to start from Unit 3 if you can. I'm not sure if it lets you skip, but if it does, I mean, I guess if it doesn't let you skip, you can just run through the first 2 sections. But really, I want you to focus on Section 3, which is conditionals. And I want you to keep going until you hit Section 9. So basically just do all of it besides Section 10. And here's the link to the homework if you do need it. I'll paste it in the chat. But yeah, that's basically it. As you can see, we've kind of stepped away from projects because right now we're just trying to get the fundamental of JavaScript JavaScript down so that we can go back and do projects. Starting next Tuesday, we're going to be going back to our HTML CSS world, and we're going to be using JavaScript to actually interact with HTML CSS. But we had to understand all the building blocks first before we could even do that. Otherwise, it's just going to be too confusing. So keep an eye out for that on Tuesday. And once a reminder, next Thursday we have off. Cool. Hopefully that wasn't too bad. I didn't have a feedback form this time, so if you do want to leave feedback, feel free to just drop it into the Discord. But I'm going to go ahead and go through the chat and see if there's any questions I missed. So DDA52 asks, can I ask another question about data? Can you recommend a statistics course or book? Yeah, so maybe it helps to like know your specific goal. If your goal is to get into machine learning and like that kind of statistics, I would say there's no better place to do that. Well, I would say there's two really good places to do that. One is Kaggle. Kaggle is like the best site, in my opinion, if you're trying to get into data science, machine learning. And they're also good at teaching statistics and math as well. And because I failed statistics when I was high school. I was not a math person, even though that's kind of what I do for a job now. So it's kind of funny. But I've always found that like learning through code and like learning through like Python examples was a better way for me to understand statistics rather than like reading statistics books, which would bore me out of my mind. And Kaggle is a really good site for that. So Kaggle, their courses, if you go to kaggle.learn, you can see that they have like, Python, intro to machine learning, intermediate machine learning. I guess they don't have an explicit statistics course, do they? But it's basically like applied statistics. They like show you how to actually apply it. So I would say that's a really good one. There are also some good books that I have that I can recommend. I'll send a link, but there's this like practical statistics for data science. This is actually one of the better books I've checked out on the subject. I'll post a link to that as well. Let's see if I can find it. Practical, but once again, I'm assuming that you're learning statistics for data science, and if you're not, then I apologize because I don't know anything else besides statistics for data science. Where is it? Practical data science, Python book. Yeah, I guess it's a different version, but this book was pretty good as well. Practical data science with Python. Wait, no, actually, no, that's not what I want. I want practical statistics. For data scientists. Yes, this one. Yeah, the crab. Share a link here. Yeah, for sure. Okay, I got a question here. So when acquiring these skills, how did you apply them to getting a job? I'm currently doing IS as a major and graduating next semester, but I'm noticing a little hard to hear back from companies. Yeah, definitely. So, this is kind of a lot to. This is going to be like a more complex thing to talk about because it totally depends on the industry and all that. But I will say, it's right now the tech industry is in a pretty big slump, as many of you might know. You see a lot of layoffs in the news. And it is true that right now, it's normal for people to take a little longer to get a job, just because the industry's been so tough. That being said, programmers and data scientists are still in demand. It's just gotten noticeably harder for entry level people to get a job. So the way I see it is like, I have to recognize that back when I was getting a job in data science or software engineering, it wasn't as challenging as it was now. So I have to recognize that people that are going through it now, I know parents are with you, it is a struggle. But the way I see it is to maximize your success of getting a job right now in this difficult industry, you have to kind of take a path that's a little more unique. And we'll cover this a lot, like what strategies I recommend during the career prep section, which will come a couple weeks later. But just to kind of give you a preview of what I mean. So I used to work for Indeed in data science, and Indeed the job site, right? And if I got one thing from Indeed is that if it's a job you care about, you should almost never ever apply online. So don't use Indeed if you're applying, like to actually submit an application. Don't apply on LinkedIn.com if you're submitting an application. The reason why I say that is because while Indeed has made it great for companies to get like a huge pool of applicants, if you think about it, as soon as a job is posted on Indeed and you apply online, you're immediately competing against like thousands, if not tens of thousands of other people. Um, and not only that, Indeed, LinkedIn, all these other companies, all these job sites, they all use automated screeners. And automated screeners are very much programmed to be heavily biased against entry level, right? Basically, the way the automated screener works is like you post your resume, the automated screener looks through, maybe it detects that, oh, you have less than 3 years of experience, which I mean, every entry level person does. How can you even have experience if you're entry level? So it sees that and then boom, it filters you out. And basically, you didn't even have a chance, right? As soon as you put in your application, because of how competitive it is now and how common automated screeners are, your chance of getting a job has basically dropped to like 0.0001%. And this applies to no matter how good you are, right? This is like everyone that applies online. So that's why my number one recommendation is, like, if you're trying to get a job in 2022, 2023, like in this difficult economy, you have to like play the game differently. You have to take strategies that other people don't usually take. And so there's many ways to do that, right? So for applications, I would say my most recommended way to get a job that you really care about is there's two ways. One is basically creating, like we did this in Bootcamp a lot too. So if you're a Bootcamp grad, you might relate to this. But basically, they have you create a list of jobs that are available, right? And you basically stack rank them. You rank the ones that you care about the most at the top, and you rank the ones that you care about the least at the bottom. And you basically work your way up from the bottom. Like, you do not even apply to your tier one companies until after you feel like you've been comfortable, like having interviews, negotiating salary, because it is like interviewing is like a muscle you have to build, right? Even if you have 20 years of experience, that doesn't mean you're going to ace an interview, right? You kind of have to warm into it. And a common mistake is people get into is that, like, let's say your dream job is at Spotify as a software engineer, and maybe you just started job searching, and as soon as you start job searching, you apply to Spotify. I would not do that unless you're just like a beast or you just get very lucky, because it's very unlikely that your first interview going back into like a interview cycle is going to go well. Like, it's just a muscle you have to get used to. So instead, I would like interview at a bunch of companies or like apply to a bunch of companies I don't care about as much, just to get the practice of, you know, like interviewing and just like passing technical interviews. And it might even give you offers. They might even give you offers that you can use with the Spotify recruiter that will help kind of push you through the process a little bit more. So that's one way. The second way is, to write, T-E-R-I, I hope I'm saying that right, recommended, which is basically either reaching out to company recruiters directly or referral farming. Or maybe not referral farming is the best name, but at least for tech companies, a lot of people might not know this, but a lot of tech companies, especially like big tech startups, if I work at Spotify in this example, if I'm an engineer at Spotify and I refer someone else to work in Spotify, Spotify will pay me $3,000 to $5,000. I don't know how much it is. It depends on the company. But at Indeed, we got paid like I think it was $5,000 if we referred another engineer or some kind of technical position. So as an employee, I benefit a lot from referring other people, right? I mean, of course, I only have to have a good chance, so that I can't just refer, I can't just go on the street and be like, hey, you want a job at Indeed? I couldn't do that. But what this means is that for you, if you want to maximize your chances at, say, maybe getting your dream job at Spotify, what you should do is you should go on LinkedIn or just like blind, or if you know anybody that works at Spotify, that's even better. But you should basically just talk to them, and like, don't just be straight up be like, hey, give me a referral, right? Because nobody likes that. Instead, not feign interest, but show that you're interested in the company. Maybe ask some questions about like what it's like, get their perspective on how it's what it's like working there. And then most of the time, if they get the gist, they'll recognize that you want a referral. And if they see that your portfolio is like not completely off the mark, then they might even offer like, hey, I can refer you, right? Because remember, they get paid. It's a win-win for them if you get the job. So that is how I would go about landing a job that you really, really like. But that being said, the pickings are slim right now. It is a hard job market, but I do feel like a lot of people give up on the job search really early because they're like, oh, I applied to like 100 companies last week and I didn't hear back from any of them. And then I ask like, well, did you apply online? And they're like, yeah, I sent out over 100 online applications. And then they get discouraged, right? Because it's a terrible feeling to just keep throwing job applications in the dark and get no response. But I'm telling you, because of because of like screeners, because of competition, it's like a surefire way to kill your motivation if you just keep putting out online applications. I would not recommend that for any serious job searcher. Unless you have a ton of experience, then it might be a little different. But for entry level, I feel like that's a very common mistake. Let's see. Okay, what is the purpose of the while loop running until proven wrong as opposed to a for loop reaching a specified value? Yeah, that's kind of what I mean about like why I'm not teaching while loops. Like I think while loops are, they're a core part of JavaScript, but I have never found like a lot of use in it. Because you almost don't want a program to run forever, at least in the web application world. Like maybe in Python or like scripting languages like lower level languages like I don't know, Rust and C, maybe it makes more sense. But for JavaScript, I couldn't think of many uses where like a while loop came in handy because you could use a while loop in place of a for loop and vice versa. But with a while loop, there's always the risk of your code being wrong, and then you have an infinite loop. And if you don't catch the infinite loop and the code goes to production, well, you have a big problem, right? Your server might blow up. You're like, some other unexpected consequence might happen. And that's why I feel like I don't really have a good answer there because I can't really tell you what is the purpose of a while loop. Maybe scraping is an example. Like if you're scraping a website and I don't know, maybe this website's like interactive and you're waiting for an element to appear, you could run a while loop that keeps checking. But even then, you would want to have some safety condition to be like, what if it's been 10 seconds and the item has never appeared? Well, you probably don't want it to keep checking forever, right? So that's the only like scraping and like running scripts like that is like one potential use of a while loop. But even then, there's like other ways to do it as well. Like I'd rather actually have that example done as a for loop where I could run like 10 checks or 15 checks or something. And then after those 15 checks, then I say, okay, it's not there. But, I don't know. Some people might disagree with me about the while loops thing, but I'm just saying I've never found that much use for it compared to like for loops. Yeah, definitely. Just also, yeah, what you said, Vuitton, about opening up your horizon to being open to getting experience wherever you can get it. I don't want to recommend like free labor to anyone. I don't think that's like a fair thing to say. But with today's industry, yeah, I would prioritize experience above all. Right? Remember that having any kind of experience on your resume gives you a huge leg up over all the other bootcamp grads, over all the other CS grads, even if it's experience that you don't necessarily like love or want. It's tough to say, but in this industry, if you can get some experience, you should take it. Especially if you've been job searching for a while, it might be worth it. Yeah, that's a good point. While loop is definitely used for algorithms way more. Like yeah, for maybe leak code problems and stuff like that, I can definitely see more of a use case for algorithms, or sorry, for while loops. But for like application development, yeah, while loops aren't. I can't say they're that common these days. All right, let's see if I missed any other questions. Cool. I think that's all the questions, and yeah, we're basically just on time on the 1 hour 30 minute mark. Cool, everyone. Yeah, thanks y'all for joining. Hopefully this session was definitely a little bit more accelerated, but we're definitely running through JavaScript really fast. I think that Code Academy practice will give you a lot better foundation on a lot of the stuff we covered. But once again, next week, we're going to start bringing it back into the HTML CSS world. So hopefully it'll all tie for full circle. And then, yeah, basically after we pass the JavaScript stuff, it's going to pick up even faster. Even if it hasn't felt like we've been picking up faster, it's going to go even faster once we get into application space. So I'm super excited for that. But yeah, thanks everyone, for sure. Thanks y'all for coming. I'll probably start winding down the stream now. But yeah, if anybody is new here and joining us, welcome to the bootcamp. We just ended the session, but You can find the Discord with this command if you want to follow along for future sessions. We also have our YouTube where you can watch all the old recordings. But yeah, that's kind of it for today. Thanks y'all for joining. I will see y'all on Tuesday. All right, take care, y'all.